Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Coco and Daltz. I'm not Daltz.
And I'm not Coco.
Do you have to do that voice every time?
I do. And I have to lean into the microphone like this.
Our levels are like off the charts now.
They are, and I'm looking at them right now.
So in today's episode, we're going to do what we've done several times in past episodes, which is take a look at one recently critically acclaimed movie that we finally just got around to seeing. And just
to great success, may I add.
Oh, yeah. Like the 6 downloads on Dunkirk is
off the charts.
And in case you're hearing some sniffing noises, that is my dog, also named Coco, who is currently sitting on my lap and sniffing our microphone. So say hello, Coco.
Hello, Coco.
There you go.
Oh, I thought you were talking to me.
So today's episode is going to be all about the Florida Project, or as Canadians would say, the Florida Project.
Or home away from home, as they know, Florida.
True. And we just recently, last night, as a matter of fact, got around to watching that on Amazon Prime, and we'd like to share our thoughts with you if you would like to hear them.
So the Florida Project is a nice little movie that was highly regarded.
A nice little movie,
It was a
really?
nice little movie.
I don't know if that's the adjective I'd use.
And stars Willem Dafoe is the best known star of that movie.
The only star
of that movie. Well, I was trying to be kind, but
right.
Yes. And he is the manager of a divey little hotel that is on the outskirts of Disney World in Florida, obviously. And it is essentially a slice of life kind of movie where we look at the bratty kids that run around without any supervision in the movie and look at, their life. They're the ones who drive the story, the trouble they get into, the stories involving them. But it's also their mothers are involved. And Willem Dafoe is like this de facto father figure for everybody, for all the kids. And when I say slice of life, usually when you say slice of life movie, that tends to mean that there's not really any story of any sort of significance. So it's just like looking at 24 hours in the life of or something like that. And then whatever happens, that becomes the movie. Mm-hmm. So that's the story of the Florida Project or Project.
And what did you think of the Florida Project overall?
I thought it was a good slice of life movie. So it didn't really do much for me because there wasn't really a lot of ups and downs and backs and forths. And there was a little bit of tension. You got to know the characters. The whole movie kind of just felt like a first act to me. It didn't feel like it was really, there wasn't anything driving the story very much.
I can see that.
What did you think, Coco?
Well, I thought back to our last episode in which we reviewed Dunkirk, which was nominated for Best Picture. The Florida Project was not, although it did. Many critics did say they felt it should have been nominated. In fact, the only Oscar it was nominated for was Willem Dafoe for Supporting Actor. So compared to Dunkirk, I gave Dunkirk a B. I liked the Florida Project. I didn't love it. So if I gave Dunkirk a B, I would not give the Florida Project over a B. I might give it a B minus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
And why?
Well, I definitely believe Willem Dafoe deserved that Oscar nomination.
He's great.
He's fantastic. In fact, if I had been a voting member of the Academy, I would have voted for him over Sam Rockwell, who actually won Supporting Actor for 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. I felt that, like Sam, not to get too much into 3 Billboards, which we have reviewed before. So if you want to go back and listen to the episode devoted to that, please do so. We would appreciate it.
In our back catalog.
I believe we're up to episode 20 now, so we're chugging along.
Yeah. We're a thing. We're not a fad. We're a thing.
We're a juggernaut.
We're happening. We are solid. For you advertisers out there, we are ready to go.
That's correct. So Sam Rockwell's character was he just didn't feel like there was any character development. He was just like the funny-ish, racist, stereotypical cop. And we've talked about this before. I didn't really buy his redemption arc at the end. He was good in that role, but that character was just very one note to me. Whereas Willem Dafoe, it was he was so understated and nuanced, and I really felt for his character.
I felt for his character because he was clearly conflicted.
Yes, and definitely. Between a rock and a hard place in many, many senses of that phrase.
Confliction always creates good art, I think. Mm-hmm. And not to put too fine a point on it because it was one character in one movie. But as opposed to Sam Rockwell's character in Three Billboards, I don't feel that he was ever conflicted.
No.
I feel he had a bit of a turning point and an epiphany, so to speak, but I don't really think he was ever, oh, wait a minute, I'm racist. Like, I don't think it was, right. I don't think there was any one of those kind of moments. Whereas in the Florida Project, I think that Willem Dafoe was like, he was just a guy trying to make a living.
Right.
He had a job that as the manager of the seedy hotel, he just needed to get his job done. And there were all these obstacles in the road of him getting his job done. But at the same time, he had a human part of him.
Right.
Was like, these kids need to have a parent in charge of them, and they clearly don't.
Right. Like, his heart was in the right place.
Yeah.
And
you could tell. That came across.
Yeah, definitely. Like, he let the kids hide under his desk during hide and seek.
Yeah.
And when the creepy New Jersey tourist came and had nefarious intentions with 20 kids who have no parental supervision whatsoever, and they're just running around wildly on the hotel's front lawn, like, Willem Dafoe is out there painting, and he has to go tell the creepy New Jersey guy to GTFO.
Yep.
Like, because mom's too busy upstairs smoking a blunt to keep an eye on her kid.
Right.
So,
yeah, I agree. I think that he was definitely the shining moment of the best part of that movie. And that's not to understate the other characters in the play or in the movie were good. But I don't think that they were really as compelling. They were sort of one note in some way. The mother of the little girl was Mooney, who was essentially the main character.
Right.
And the mother of Mooney was very well done, very well portrayed. Mm-hmm. But it was clearly somebody who was on a self-destructive path, and there was no confliction. She never felt guilty or bad about raising her child. She never had, there were no scenes there where she was second guessing herself or anything like that.
I did feel for her a little bit in that, she was clearly a terrible mother and overall, and she had no business having and raising a child, but her heart was sort of in the right place too, in terms of, they're walking down the street hand in hand, and, Mooney is 6 years old and she's a very small child, and she's like, "You're walking too fast." And so the mom puts down her bag of stuff and lets Mooney get up on her back.
True. That was a good scene.
And carries her. And I also never...
There was a bit of tenderness there.
Yes. So there was a little bit of her the mother trying to do the right thing in some ways, but...
She was clearly in over her head, but you never really got the sense that she was doing anything other than... relying on chemical substance to get through that.
Right.
And not to, again, oversimplify something that's a very common problem in some parts of the country, but there was no portrayal that she had any sort of conflict going on. And we're talking about Bria Vinate, I believe is the way you pronounce her name.
This was the lady who played Mooney's mother. Her name in the movie was Haley. This was her first acting role. She apparently had 3 weeks of acting lessons with a coach before they filmed the movie. And
it didn't show. Like, you couldn't tell she was acting. She was really good. In other words, she was good at what she was, of the material she was given. Yeah,
definitely bought her as a not entirely
classy
individual. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, she was good. And the little girl who was Mooney was played by Brooklyn Kimberly Prince, as credited, and Brooklyn Prince as she's known as, apparently. She was really good. I didn't like her at all in the movie. And so that was effective, because if that kid was my kid, right. She wouldn't be talking to adults that way. There was all sorts of reactions that I was having so it came across as really genuine.
Yeah, she was very bratty.
She was very bratty.
Because there was no parental supervision whatsoever. But because I don't have kids, I also...
Kids that aren't fuzzy.
No, kids that are fuzzy.
You don't have kids.
Oh, I do have kids that are fuzzy.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Okay, I get what you're going with that. Okay. But she was super duper bratty, and I was like, oh, thank God that's not my child. But I also, I mean, I get it. You know, there's nobody around to tell them no. So they're going to go and they're going to figure out ways to entertain themselves. And a lot of those ways are not ways that I would want my child to entertain herself. But there was a little bit of sympathy because you could just see like the cycle repeating itself. Like Haley is basically a crack whore.
Yes.
Like living in a welfare motel, having to sell perfumes that she bought wholesale to tourists in hotel parking lots at a markup to make her rent every week because she can't go out and get a decent, steady job. And she's raising her child in no way. I mean, basically her kid's going to become her because she's going and she's bumming money off of tourists at the Mr. Tasty or whatever so she can get like an ice cream and the cycle
is going to continue, and you can see that, and you can see. I think that's why the story was told through the eyes of the kids, these innocent kids, and there's not really a lot of significant dialogue from the kids or for most of the movie from that point of view because they're just kids living this horrible, endless, down the drain kind of existence in the shadow of this fantastic resort that people come from around the world to visit.
Right. Like that was one of the things throughout the movie was like the helicopters flying
constantly taking off from their backyard. Yeah. And the one, I will say the one scene that was completely heartbreaking, and there's a scene, and I won't say where in the movie it is or what happens.
Just say it.
But there's a scene where Mooney, who is this hardened kid and is talking back to adults and is given attitude all through the whole movie, at one point in the movie, she breaks down and cries, and it's the most horrific scene because you got to know that she has been broken at this point because she's seen so many horrible, terrible things, and she's gone through all this, and she's become this grown up. She's grown up very quickly at, I don't even know how old she's supposed to be, like maybe 6 or something like that, 5 or 6. And all of a sudden she just breaks down and she's all of a sudden a kid. And that was a really interesting scene. That was the hardest scene for me to watch, but also the most effective probably in the whole movie.
Well, I want to talk about that a little bit, and I want to go into detail about that. So, spoilers ahead for people who have not seen the movie and want to see it and don't want it spoiled. Just turn off now,
or just listen with an open mind.
If you're like me and you don't care about spoilers, like that's cool. Keep listening. Yeah. So I mean, I'm going to go in. I'm going to talk about.
You're going to spoil.
I'm going to spoil it. So are you cool with that? Because I know you don't like it when I spoil.
So you're putting the orange juice in the milk, is what you're saying. Gross. You're spoiling it.
Gross. Why would you ever do that? That's so gross.
Exactly. Same thing with a movie. But anyway, go on.
Okay. So the scene that Daltz is talking about is actually the very end of the movie. Child Services has come to take Mooney away from Haley. As they should.
Right.
Because Haley,
that shouldn't be a shock.
Right. Because Haley is a terrible mother. And Mooney manages to escape and she runs to the welfare motel next door to the welfare motel that she lives in to see her friend Jancy. And she breaks down and she cries in the doorway. And Jancy's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And then everything kind of changes. And suddenly Jancy grabs Mooney's hand and they run away and they run to Disney World. They run into the Magic Kingdom.
They are that close to Disney World.
They're apparently that close to Disney World.
Although you have to suspend some disbelief there because they're not really going to run.
Right.
The parking lot at Disney is the size of the state of Connecticut, I think.
Right. And not to mention, like, all the security guards, like, at the entrance to the Magic Kingdom aren't just going to let these two little kids run in.
And by the way, you need some tickets to get in.
Right. Yeah. But anyway, so they run into the Magic Kingdom, and the hotel that Mooney lives in with Haley is called the Magic Castle. And so they run to, like, the castle there in the Magic Kingdom. Is it Cinderella's castle or Sleeping Beauty's castle or whatever it is? But it's the castle. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. Yeah. And that's where the movie stops. And that scene is very different from the rest of the movie because the rest of the movie is clearly shot with regular movie cameras that are, on tripods or whatever. And this scene is suddenly there's a score and it's shot like on an iPhone and it's very jarring and disjointed. And
it's a wonderful moment, actually.
Right. But then it cuts and then it's nothing. And I was kind of like, I wasn't confused by the end, but I was just kind of like
waiting for something else.
I was waiting for something else. I was like, that's it. And I actually, after we got done watching the movie, I wrote
a letter to the filmmaker.
I did.
Is there more stuff?
I wrote a strongly worded email to Sean Baker. I believe that's the director's name. And I was like, WTF, bro.
I think we watched a movie that was cut off.
Right.
What was the end?
And I read some interviews with him, and he said that, like, throughout the rest of the movie, like, even at her 6-year-old level of cognizance, take a shot, people who take shots when we say big words, she knew that things weren't awesome. Like, it wasn't like this super happy, carefree childhood, which, I mean, to be fair, nobody has, but hers was especially fraught.
Well, I don't know.
Given the circumstances.
I had a pretty good childhood.
Well, nobody has a 100% perfect childhood.
No, nobody has perfect anything.
Right, exactly. So, like, through the rest of the movie, you'd kind of seen her use her imagination to overcome hardships. Like, she can't go to the animal kingdom, so she and Jancy go look at cows, and that's their safari.
Right.
And there was some other example that he gave. So at the very end, this was her version of a happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
Was like her and her best friend basically going to the real magic castle. You know, and I get that, but at the same time, I'm like, this is not a movie that's ever going to have a happy ending in reality. Like, I get the whole, this is how the 6-year-old is coping with the situation version, but I think nobody went into that movie expecting Haley to suddenly turn it around and realize that she's got to do better for her family and get a job as a receptionist and...
Or as a greeter at the Magic Kingdom.
Right, exactly. And then on the weekend, she bakes cookies with Mooney, and now Mooney's actually in school, and she goes to a daycare, and she's not spitting on cars. And I was like, you know, I think for me, it would have been like a more realistic ending if you would have seen Mooney in the back of the DCF car, like crying and being like, Mommy! You know, like, just the ending to me was just very, I don't want to say unsettling, but it was just...
I didn't mind the ending so much. I mean, it was, as you said, it was completely different from most of the rest of the movie. It had a score. It had a pace to it. There was a frantic pace to it that the rest of the movie didn't have in terms of the... You could tell that they were chasing these two kids, whereas the rest of the movie was very deliberately shot. Right. There were a lot of very wide open scenes. There was a lot of sunsets in the background, whereas this was very much compacted and quickly done. But it was in stark contrast to the rest of the movie. And I didn't mind that because it was... Speaking to the point that I mentioned at the top, was that this is a slice of life movie, right? And I think that was the happiest ending that this slice of life could have had for like an hour and a half or 2 hours of the movie that it was that stretched like that was about it. And I think that seeing her in the back of the car crying, that would have been an ending as well. I think that would have been legitimate, but I didn't mind the ending that as it transpired because it gave you a little bit of an uptick. Now, I don't know if that was me being a sucker for a Hollywood ending or just I enjoyed all of a sudden. It's like, wait a minute. All of a sudden, it seemed like it was a different movie. Right. Like the music kicked in and they were happy and they were enjoying themselves. And
they're just being kids.
They were just being the kids that they were supposed to be. And like all these other kids that were in the Magic Kingdom as they were running through the Magic Kingdom and they got absorbed sort of in that crowd and that atmosphere. I didn't mind it. I thought it was actually a pretty interesting and creative way to end that movie because as we were going through the movie, I'm thinking, how is this movie going to end? Like, it's going to be a flash forward 15 years and it's going to be Mooney in the same room that she was raised in and she's taken Johns like her mom did, you know, and all this sort of stuff. So
it was a very kind of hard movie to watch.
It was.
Like,
it was
not in this, like, I mean, 12 Years a Slave was a very difficult movie to watch, but it was just
different kind of difficult.
Different kind of difficult, but just like, I mean, I realize that I'm incredibly privileged. Like, yeah, I want, you know, a better job and I want more money, but I don't live in a welfare motel. Like, I'm not having to turn tricks to like make my rent. I'm not having to sell like wholesale bottles of perfume to tourists who pity and are scared of me. Like, but people actually live that way. And it's not something that I see. And so it was just very hard. Like, you know, as you're watching it, like you can't escape it. Like there's no happiness. Like,
that's right.
At all. So.
And I think that was a very interesting glimpse into the world, into not just the poverty world, but the white poverty world, because there was a lot of white poverty in that movie. And it being Florida, there's a lot of white poverty in Florida in pockets. And in the South, too, as well, from what I understand. So I thought that was a very interesting glimpse at something that you don't see portrayed, to your point, very often in movies. And just the visceral day-to-day got to make my rent.
Right.
And what am I going to do to make my rent this week? And by the way, the rent was, I think it was some insignificant amount of money relative to how we live here in Connecticut and that sort of thing. Like, I think it was $38 a night was the rate in the hotel, as I heard on the movie in this at one point. I don't know if that was the weekly rate or not, but the point is, it wasn't probably a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, but she was struggling to get through and provide. And so there's a bit of a heart that she's got there. She's working hard to keep the roof over the head of her and her daughter.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of that sort of stuff. And I think you're right. I think that made me think. That made me stop, and it made that movie difficult to watch for sure.
Yeah, because I don't even know, like, none of my friends and family are even in those circumstances either. So it's just not something that I have any kind of day-to-day contact and experience with. So it was...
Yeah. And you can imagine members of the Academy watching that movie in their tuxedos and or
Right.
however they're going to the movie, the everyday movie, or watching the screening, the copy of the screening that they get, and in their fabulous mansions, and they're seeing this everyday poverty that they have no connection to whatsoever.
Right.
I mean, that's an uncomfortable way to watch a movie.
And that was another way, like you mentioned Haley, like, struggling to pay the rent, even though it's not what most of us would probably consider to be any kind of outrageous sum at all. But, like, that was another way in which you could kind of see that her heart was in the right place, because she got, like, she, for various reasons, didn't have a, quote unquote real job. She tried to make money by selling the perfume. She got shut down by that. Well, then she tried to make money turning tricks, and she got shut down with that. So at the very end, like, she had to just swallow her pride and go try to have her friend, who she'd had a falling out with, like, spot her the money so they wouldn't get thrown out. Because I did think this is another way also that Willem Dafoe is between a rock and a hard place. Like, he cares about these people. He knows he's going to have to throw them out.
Yep.
But where are they going to go? They're going to be living under a bridge. And so... even though Haley is a terrible mother and she has no business raising a child, like,
she's still a human.
She's still a human, and she had to go beg from somebody who didn't, she didn't want to beg from, but she had to do what she had to do.
Yeah.
And then it all went to hell because she beat the crap out of her.
Well, and the other thing about Willem Dafoe...
she was her own worst enemy.
And Willem Dafoe being conflicted was that Haley was not necessarily very nice to Willem Dafoe at any point during the movie.
No, not by any means.
And so he was, in some ways, some unseen way that maybe he could relate to the upbringing of the child. And that's where it all came for him. It was like, this kid has got to get some sort of upstanding adult in the picture, because, or else you could see it almost. Even though there was no serious moment where we there's a heavy duty close up of Willem Dafoe thinking and staring off into the distance and wondering what's going to happen. There was no moment like that, no obvious moment that he was thinking about it, but you could tell his character was considering that, and there was a lot of thought going into it, and that's why he was letting the kids play hide and go seek underneath his desk and do things that he didn't necessarily have to do. Right.
And when he had to evict them from their room for one night so they couldn't establish residency, and they went to a hotel that was supposed to have a reciprocal agreement with the Magic Castle.
Right.
And they didn't want to take Haley and Mooney, and they said they'd up their rates. And Haley was like, well, I don't have it. And he gave the hotel the money out of his own pocket.
He spotted them, yeah.
But then they said, well, we don't even want this white trash here. And so Haley took the money and, like, walked off with it. Yeah, she definitely was her own worst enemy in many, many ways. Like, I kept watching her and thinking, like, she's got to be... even, like, 24, like, if she had a 6-year-old, like 22, 24, and she's just such a bratty, like, she's stuck in, like, a very middle school mindset. And
well, it's almost like Willem Dafoe is the dad to both of them.
Yeah.
The Haley being a kid in her own right, and then obviously Mooney being a kid, just a little kid, but they both needed some supervision.
Right.
It was obvious from the get-go, and it's a real interesting juxtaposition.
Oh, take a shot.
That was such a big word I couldn't even say it. But just the way that Willem Dafoe had to handle that whole building. It was almost like he was the dad to that whole building, because it was filled with ne'er-do-wells and reprobates and all sorts of people who were in trouble all the time. And
there was another room earlier in the movie where he had to throw the occupants out for
malfeasance.
Prostitution.
Yes.
And he didn't throw Haley out. He just said, "Oh, you can't do that anymore because now all your overnight guests are going to have to register at the front desk." Like he could have thrown her out, but he didn't.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and it was also you mentioned about the fact that it was a glimpse into that kind of life. I didn't really know that sort of thing existed around Disney World either. I mean, it's a movie, so I'm sure maybe parts of it are exaggerated, but it makes sense because the people that work at Disney World
get paid nothing,
have to live somewhere.
Right.
And I'm not saying there's crack whores working at Disney World, but there is definitely a community around Disney World that is made up of people from other places who work in Disney World and are just making ends meet. I mean, there's a story in the New York Times about people living in their cars who work at Disneyland and Disney World because they can't make ends meet because especially in Disneyland, where it's in the area that it's in, housing is so expensive all the way around it that the people that work at Disneyland can't afford to live anywhere close. So there's definitely that kind of highs and lows, riches and poor, and that kind of thing. There's definitely that paradox, if you will.
Take another shot. You are so drunk now, listeners.
So that was another thing that I should have thought of, but it didn't dawn on me until I watched that movie, is that there's got to be these communities around that park, and probably a lot of that stuff going on, and probably communities don't even look that good. I mean, the Purple Hotel was actually a fairly nice looking hotel on the surface.
Well, and that was the thing too, is that the reason Haley had the falling out with the friend she had to go beg them rent money from was because the friend's son and Mooney had been friends, and they were unsupervised, and they would go get into trouble, and they actually ended up like burning down like this luxury condominium that was nearby, that in the Florida like housing bust, like all these condominiums are just standing there vacant. So you've got like all these people struggling to live in these like crappy welfare motels and all these luxury condos nearby that are just vacant because nobody can afford them. So,
and that was a really telling moment too, where the community came out to watch the condo burn.
Right.
And nobody was upset by it burning.
Right.
They were actually encouraging it to burn.
Right. They had beers and they were taking like selfies like in front of the fire.
It's like, come on, aren't you going to watch the building burn down? Come on, you're missing it. Like it was a big celebration.
Right.
So overall, the Florida Project, should it have been nominated for a Best Picture Academy Award? Coco, your take.
I'm gonna say no, but
so the Academy got it right.
So I'm gonna say the Academy got it right, but I have not seen every movie that was nominated, so there could very well be a movie that got nominated that I would think this would be in place of, but I also don't think that Three Billboards should have gotten nominated because Three Billboards was a mess. Great performances, messy script.
Really?
So
you think it shouldn't have been nominated?
If I were going to nominate Three Billboards or The Florida Project, I might have nominated The Florida Project over Three Billboards.
I think I liked Three Billboards more than I liked The Florida Project, but I like The Florida Project pretty good.
Mm-hmm. What about you?
Dunkirk would not have been nominated if I had had my choice.
Yeah, you weren't. But I mean, World War II movies, those are Oscar bait.
But the Darkest Hour was such a superior movie. The acting was so superior. The dialogue was fantastic. So, I mean, you're going to have not that there's a quota,
right?
But if you're going to have a movie, if you're going to have a story nominated, one or the other, then take the best one. It's a war movie. It was nominated. I get it. I don't know. But I think they probably should have gone to maybe 5 this year.
Oh, yeah.
5 nominations like they used to in the olden days.
Mm-hmm.
And that would have been a really deep 5
Definitely.
nominations.
Yeah, there wouldn't have been any weak links
No.
if they just had 5. But
no.
But art is subjective, so...
Art is subjective, and that's why we're here.
And on that note, for another episode, thank you for tuning in. I'm not Daltz.
And I'm not Coco.
Oh my God, with the voice.